We got a fun topic today. We're going to take data frames and combine them together. So 2 or more data frames, you can do some pretty cool things when you want to bring them into one data frame. We will use 4 different ways of doing it: concatenate, merge, join, and we'll also do append, which is another way to concatenate 2 data frames together. So let's dive in and get started. The first thing to share with you is there's a lot of code in this one, and so down below this video, if you look and click on like the show more or more right underneath the video, you should be presented with a lot of the code that you can use to copy and paste. So I use Jupyter Notebook. I'll share with you where and when to copy it in and when to use it. So hopefully that'll make things go a little bit smoother. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to import NumPy as np for our alias and import Pandas as pd for the alias. And once we install those, now we can input our first piece of code. So it'll be the first thing that is down in your comment section. This one's a function, and what this does is allows you to display the data frames like side by side. It's really cool, and it helps me so I don't have to see data frames that are stacked and keep scrolling up and down. So hopefully you like that. And so copy and paste that here and then run the code. And then the next thing is the data frames. So copy and paste that in here, and once you do that and run it, then you'll be presented with the 4 data frames. So once you're at this point, we can go ahead and keep going. So we have 4 data frames. We have df1, df2, df3, and df4. df1 and 2 we're going to use right away with concatenating. And we'll talk about 3 and 4 in just a little bit. But here they are down below. So here's df1, has a column with A, B, and C. And df2, which is our other data frame, has a column with dog, A, and cat. Okay, so let's concatenate 2 data frames. We're going to concatenate df1 and df2 right up here, which are these 2 right here, ABC and dog, A, cat. So I'm going to bring in Pandas with pd, which is the alias, type in concat, open up my parentheses, go for some brackets, and type in df1 and df2. Now before we hit let's see what this looks like, I like you to actually type in access is equal to 1, and I'll explain that in just a second. So now we have our 2 data frames, and there they are. Now they're side by side as one data frame. Axis 1, what that does is it takes the data and puts it side by side. And you'll often be doing that because a lot of these things are columns that you want to be placing together. The other option is to do axis equals to 0, which what do you assume is going to stack it the other way, which is up and down or vertically. So this one looks a little different because we got some NaNs in here, which NaN stands for not a number, but it's a null value. And if you look at this and you're having a hard time understanding why you see these here, it's important to understand this. And so let's just take a quick second. First of all, here's the first data frame, which is df1. You can see it intact. Looks good. Now, appended to this data frame or added is the column of dog, because dog is in the second data frame. And dog has values of 21, 23, and 22. Well, since the first data frame, df1, didn't have dog in it, it's going to add dog as another column. Okay, so that's the first reason why we see dog and now cat here, because they didn't exist. Let's look at A. A was already in data frame 1. So since it was there, it's not going to add another column because it's already there. It's defined as A. It's just going to now add those rows with the values of 24, 22, and 22 down below the first data frame. And that's what it did. 24, 22, 22. And as you can see, the index values were actually preserved, and that's something important to note. So why do we see the NaNs? Well, if you take dog is not in the first data frame, and so when you stack them together, along this initial index that A brought in that's preserved, it says, hey, I don't have a dog here, so I have nothing to present to you, so I'm just going to put a null in here. So look at this, get comfortable with knowing why the nulls are there, why they're not, before you move on. Okay. All right, and the last thing I want to note is actually a very important thing. When you take two data frames together and you get null values in the entire data frame, when you're looking at the entire data frame, it changes the integers to a float. Check this out. Look at column A. All of these are integers. It's because in df1 and df2, in these two data frames, in the column A, there were values there for the entire thing, but that is not the case for column B. Since column B was only part of that first data frame, but there's no values in df2, these are coming back as null, but it changes those integers to a float. So keep that in mind and know that when you bring in two data frames together and you're looking at the entire data frame, okay, you're going to change that to a float. Now, there's a lot of other conversation about this when we start taking conditions and just looking at things in specific columns, and it doesn't necessarily work in that manner. But nonetheless, just keep this in mind at least for right now. Now we're going to use the append function. The append function works very similar to concat. And let's just go ahead and dive in here and start typing it out. So we'll call a variable, let's just call it df underscore append. And we're going to set that equal to df1 dot append df2. So df1 was that first data frame, and we're appending to that df2, and then I'll go under here and I'll type the name of the variable so we can see what it looks like. And it looks very similar to what we see above, where we concatenated df1 and df2, same thing that's happening generally with the append function. And I should also mention, I'm sure you folks know this, but it's really important to share if somebody is new and they're going, hey, how do I know all this stuff? You can always type in the function and pull up the doc string, and in this case I'm getting ready to hit my shift tab, and what popped up here is some information that your eye generally draws to help you with a lot of these functions that are here. This is going to be and should become one of your best friends, so really get used to looking through these, knowing where to draw your eye. My eye generally draws to this first part where you see the function is being used and what are the parameters that can be passed inside, and then further down below here you have a lot more details about what those parameters are and what have you. Okay, now the next thing I want to do is let's just go over quickly some of the important concepts of concatenation, and then we're going to go into merging. So the important thing is that the indices are preserved. Remember, we saw that before, and even you can see it here. The indices are preserved in this sense. They're kept, they stay with that piece of data. The next thing is when integers are placed inside of a column for an entire data frame, when there's other like null values, you're going to have those integers change to floats. We saw that up here. Right here is an example where in column B we had some null values when we brought in these two data frames together, and so those integers changed to float values. And then of course any missing values are going to be presented as NaN or not a number. Okay, and then the last thing is you can use append if you want to stack a couple of data frames on top of each other as well. The next thing we're going to talk about is taking data frames and merging them together. It's another way to bring data frames together. This one's a little different than concatenate, and we'll show you some of the interesting things around it. So the first thing I want to do is let's just display the two data frames we're going to use to show you merge. And we're going to use data frame 3 and data frame number 4. And again, the reason why we can type in the word display is because we have that function up above that we defined. If you're not using that function, then you can just print out, just as I'm showing here, df3 and df4 and see the data frames themselves without having to use that function. Okay, nonetheless, here's the two functions, data frames. The first data frame has first name, last name, and age. And there's 3 columns of data and 3 rows of data. So 3 people and there's their age. The second data frame has first name, last name. Okay, so cool. So these are the same. And hair color. So what merge does is it allows you to combine data frames using like a key or data that's within a specific column. You can combine this data frame with this data frame by using a value in the first name column or a value in, for example, the last name column. And you'll often see this like in the real world. If you're taking 2 data sets, I worked in HR and I would always be combining data sets. And the way we always generally did it is based upon the employee ID. So the employee ID would be in one column, in one data set, employee ID in another one. And then we said, I want you to combine these 2 data sets based upon the key, and the employee ID would be the key. So very similar concept within database environments, and we'll talk a tiny bit about that in just a second. What I want to do first of all is let's just go ahead and merge these 2 data frames together. So let me put a code cell below here, and so we'll create our first variable. We'll type in MER1 for merge1, and we're going to make that equal to Pandas, our best friend here that has the merge function, and I'll type in merge. And so now is when it gets a little fun. So I'm going to be listing out and typing out specifically what it is that I'm inputting in as parameters so you can see kind of the full context of this. But on the left side of this merging data frame, we're going to put in df3, which is this first one right here. On the right side, we're going to put in df4. Put another comma, and interestingly enough, you use the word how, which is going to ask you, hey, how do you want to combine these things? We're going to use inner for our first one. If you're not familiar with inner, outer, left, and right, seriously, take a few minutes and go Google this. We're not going to talk about this today, but I'll definitely do a video on this if I get any interest on that. But inner is in really short, quick commentary is that it's going to take 2 data sets and say, hey, when I find you in the left one and I find you in the right one, I'll bring you in together. But if I don't find you in either one of the data sets, then I'm going to exclude you from the data set. If that doesn't make sense, please go Google this and find a great video for inner, outer, and joins within SQL databases or the context of Panda merge. All right, so we have inner, and then the last thing we're going to put is on. And this is where we're going to use our key, okay? The way and means in which we're going to combine things. I used that example before with an employee ID, so that's like the key. Here, we don't have an employee ID, but we have first name and we have last name. And I'm going to show you here that you can actually use more than one key, and we're going to do that here. So we'll use the first key of first name, and we'll use the another key of last name. Really doesn't do much here because it would still produce the same thing whether you did one key or the other one. But I want you to show you can combine keys. So let's go ahead and then build our second merge, and we will combine both of the data frames, but we're going to do an outer join. And the outer, or the how parameter of outer, what that's going to do is something different than what the inner does. It basically says, oh, data frame here, include all the rows, regardless if there's any data in it or not. And that's where we anticipate seeing not a numbers or the null values. And that's why I wanted to show you this, because it's really important that you get comfortable with seeing null values, because a lot of data that's merged together, you will see a lot of null values. Okay, so we'll do pd merge, and what's the first thing I put in there? Left. So we'll type in left is equal to the data frame of 3. Basically, I'm typing in what I just did above. The right is going to equal to data frame 4, or variable number df4. Our how, this is going to change. We will now want outer. And then the last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to say how we want this be combined based upon the key. And we'll go ahead and we'll just put in one key this time. We'll pull in full name. It'll produce the same thing as two keys, so with first name and last name. So now we can pull up our function that we built above, display, and we'll call mer1 and mer2, and let's run it and see what we've got. All right, so the first one here is synonymous with mer1, and as you can see, using the how of inner did indeed exclude when it didn't find data that matches between the two. Okay, because if you remember here, for example, Matt Anderson is in DataFrame 3, but Matt is not in DataFrame 4. So Matt is going to be excluded because he's not found in both, and because the key is based upon finding Matt, his first name and also his last name, and we didn't find it, so it's excluded. But that's different when we use outer. Here, outer, you'll see Matt's included because it said, hey, I'll combine you guys, we'll make it work, but if Matt's not in the first data frame and there was some value that was passed, like in this example, hair color, then I'm going to pull in and bring in a null value and tell you it's null. Okay, so now that we've done that with merges, I highly recommend you spending some time playing around with merge, coming in here and definitely using the doc string or the help by opening this up and just reading through it and understand all the crazy things you can do with merge. It's actually pretty powerful. And again, the way to do that is type in pd merge, and I'm hitting shift and tab, and there's my doc string, and you can scroll down through this. And another way to pull up help is, and I use this one a lot, is to just type in help and put in this case, the function of pd merge. Just run your code cell, and really nicely presented is this information down below. The reason why I like this is because it's there for me when I want to use it, and then I can just collapse it by clicking on this gray thing there on the left, and then I can open it back up just by mousing over this gray bar, and there it is again. So if you like having something kind of readily there, that's kind of a nice way to do it. Okay, so the last one we're going to talk about is join. And so in your comments section right down below the video again, here's the code that you can copy and paste in here. We're going to create a couple of data frames. One's called weight and one is called smell. So go ahead and copy that, and we'll go ahead and then input into a code cell the following: smell, which is one of the data frames, dot join, and join is going to be the function. And inside of that, we'll put the data frame that we're joining to smell, which is weight, and then we're saying how. And you're already familiar with how, so you know that outer is going to bring in all the rows associated with it, regardless if there's going to be null values, right? So let me go ahead and run that, and I get an error. And the reason I get an error is because I forgot to run this code cell above. All right, so I ran the code cell, I'll run this again, and there we go. All right, so I guess a couple of things that this is pointing to is that you use joins when just kind of you want to use it to join it based upon the index. And so that's how they're often used. The indexes here, I put in here of DG, CT, MS, and MO. And we have the same indexes for smell, and you'll see that CT, DG, MO, and MS are used, and that is actually the key that it's using to combine the two data frames together. Okay? You can also use join to join it based upon columns, and that's all in the help information and explaining how to do that if you want to. But generally speaking, join is used when you want to just combine things together based upon the index. So the outer join, worked, or the how with the outer here, and we'll just go ahead and do one more, which is just inner. So I'm just going to copy this and put another code cell below there, paste it, and just change this to inner. And you'll see that we're only going to get those rows that are in both of the data frames. Okay. So that said, hopefully this was helpful. Feel free to play around with all these concepts today, and thanks for watching the video.